Welcome back to part 3 of this video series on data security for Microsoft Copilot for M365. In the last video, we discussed the data oversharing problem and what we can do to mitigate it using proper access controls. However, there are many other data security and compliance concerns associated with Copilot besides data oversharing. So how do we address those? For that, we can use a cloud tool called Microsoft Purview. If you've never heard about it and are wondering what it is, well, simply put, Purview is a family of products, a toolbox, if you will. The tools serve a variety of purposes, but what they all have in common is that they somehow deal with the security, the governance, or the compliance of data. So whether that's classifying data, or whether that's finding data, or labeling data, or whether that's protecting data, or monitoring data. There's something for everything in Microsoft Purview. Consider it Microsoft's Swiss Army knife of data security and compliance. And as you might guess, some of these tools come in very handy in the context of M365 Copilot, especially given the fact that Copilot and Purview interact in many useful ways, and we'll see many of those. To start with, let's briefly return to the data oversharing problem that we discussed in the previous video. Because while proper access management, like we discussed, is great and absolutely important and vital, Purview offers an additional tool for that. In fact, for reasons that will hopefully become clear very shortly, I consider this Purview's most important tool in the Copilot context, and that is sensitivity labels, as they're called. As the name implies, these allow us to label a file with a descriptor, which expresses how sensitive those files are. If you remember the good old days of yore, where all documents were made of paper, you could sometimes see documents with a small tag attached, and sensitivity labels are exactly the same, only digital. Their job is to graphically show a user how sensitive that file is. Additionally, since sensitivity labels live in the metadata of a file, they always travel with that file, just like those paper tags on a document do. After all, if I send a file via email and a coworker receives it, then it's perfectly pointless if that coworker doesn't also see how sensitive the document is. Having sensitivity labels set up allows an organization to train its users to see those sensitivity labels and to respect them, and to know what to do with these types of data specifically. So, for example, an organization might decide that financial reports should always be labeled as secret, or it might instruct its users, don't send data that's labeled confidential outside the company. Certain Purview tools can even enforce such instructions. So how does this help us in the Copilot context? In a major way, because just as users can see and respect these labels, so too does Copilot. As an example, let's say I ask Copilot, as a user, to create a document or a PowerPoint presentation for me based on several documents. Let's say we will use 3 documents for this. And 2 of them are labeled public, in other words, data that is for public consumption, and 1 of them is labeled confidential. Now, as we learned previously, assuming that the user has access to these documents, Copilot will, of course, happily oblige. It will go into the graph and find these documents and then build the presentation. Now, when it does that, it will apply the confidential label automatically, because that is the strictest label that it came across while gathering information. And only then will it return that document to the user. This, by the way, works even when Copilot doesn't create a document at all, but simply provides a summary in a chat window. Both the summary itself, as well as all the references that Copilot pulled from, will have a corresponding label. This means that the user is always aware of the sensitivity of the generated content. As mentioned in the previous video, Microsoft was very keen to ensure that Copilot doesn't make information more accessible than it already is. But now you may ask, what if Copilot draws information from files that aren't labeled? Let's say in our example, we have a fourth file here that has no label. That's not a problem, because here we can use something that is called auto-labeling. As the name implies, this allows us to specify rules by which content should be labeled. For example, if a file contains personally identifiable information, it should be labeled confidential. Then, if Copilot draws information from this document and accesses PII data, it will automatically label the output confidential, even if the original data was unlabeled. This already strongly enhances our data security and compliance options with Copilot. But wait, there's more. Sensitivity labels actually have another trick up their sleeve, and that is that they can apply encryption. Better still, the encryption is smart in the sense that it's possible to specify either individual users or user groups that should have access to the document's contents. Any user or user group that hasn't been given access can therefore not read the document. This means that a document is safe even if it's sent outside the organization's tenant. So how does this help us with Copilot? Why is this important here? Recall from the previous video that Copilot acts on behalf of the user. It inherits the user's access rights and permissions. Therefore, we can use the encryption that sensitivity labels provide as an additional layer of access control. After all, if a user can't access a document because it's encrypted with a sensitivity label, Copilot won't be able to access it either. Now, at this point, you might be saying, yet another access control system that I have to manage? Aren't the ones I have already enough? Well, not really, because unlike sensitivity labels, all other access control tools, including the ones we discussed above, are only effective inside their own system, but are useless outside of it. For example, let's say we have a user here, and that user has access to a SharePoint site. The user, let's say, is supposed to have access to this SharePoint site. Now, let's say we have a document here, a sensitive document, that the user downloads to their computer and then sends that file via email. Now, when this happens, even users that didn't originally have access to the file can now access it, because SharePoint restrictions are useless outside of it. But let's say we have a file, again on the same SharePoint, but it has a sensitivity label applied. And the user again downloads it and again sends it via email. Now, in this case, this is perfectly fine, because users that aren't in the access control list of the label do not have access to this. Because, as we said, the label always travels with the file, and the encryption stays in place, even if the file is moved. Now, this means that labels are incredibly useful on their own, but with Copilot, they practically become a must-have. Not only do they ensure that sensitivity classifications are inherited when users generate content with Copilot, like we said here, but they also enable an additional airtight access control that acts independently of the system where the data is stored. So, if you get one thing out of this, it's this: use sensitivity labels. Now, with that, I'd say we can move to another compliance topic altogether. We can leave the data oversharing problem behind us and move to something that is called retention, which I'll just short to RET for brevity's sake. When it comes to Copilot, every organization has a choice to make when it comes to the interactions its users have with Copilot, and that is how long to keep them. Both for regulatory and internal policy reasons, it can be necessary to hold on to, i.e. retain Copilot interactions for certain periods of time. And we can control this with a Purview tool called Data Lifecycle Management. What's a data lifecycle? Simply put, it refers to the stages data goes through from cradle to grave. If we simplify this complex topic just a little bit, let's say we have time on this axis here. At some point in time, data is first created. And after that, for a while, it's shared, edited, analyzed, and so forth, until at some point it is accessed, modified, read for the last time. Then, after that, either from the point of its creation or from the point of its last access, this piece of data must not be deleted. We say that the data has to be retained. Then, after some more time has passed, once the data is no longer needed, it should be automatically deleted. This is what we call the deletion period. And this here, to the point of retention, is, unsurprisingly, what we call the retention period. The Data Lifecycle Management tool in Purview allows us to control these retention and deletion periods. During the retention period, Purview will ensure that files under retention cannot be deleted. And after the deletion period has passed, assuming it's no longer under retention, Purview will automatically delete the file for us. Now, to configure this, we have two ways. The first is the use of so-called policies. And these act globally. For example, with a policy, we can specify that all documents in a specific SharePoint site, or all content created in a certain geographic location or in a certain mailbox and so forth, should be kept for X years and then deleted after Y years. The more fine-grained option is to use our old friend labels. Except here, this doesn't refer to sensitivity labels, but instead retention labels. But the idea is the same, to apply individualized retention settings at the item level, and to have those retention settings travel wherever the file goes. Getting back to Copilot, retention policies allow you to specifically target Copilot interactions, because, as you will remember, what a user and Copilot discuss, so to speak, are literally just chat interactions. The user chats with Copilot. Policies allow you to specifically target those interactions, the prompts and the outputs that the user and Copilot exchange. So, if we can automatically decide how long we want to retain those, the retention period, how long should you retain them? There's no one-size-fits-all answer to this. Some companies prefer to hold on to Copilot interactions for as long as possible, sometimes for even a whole decade, while others decided that they would get rid of them after just 14 days. This largely depends on the regulatory environment you find yourself in and what your internal policies dictate. In addition to retention, the ability to enforce automated deletion is useful in another sense too, because the quality of Copilot like all machine learning and AI systems, depends crucially on the quality of the data that's fed into it. Microsoft consistently aims to improve Copilot by upgrading the AI behind it and bringing it to the newest GPT model and so forth. But all of that is useless if Copilot gets fed with outdated or irrelevant, trashy data. The result will invariably turn out bad. It's like everything else in life. Garbage in, garbage out. And here, data lifecycle management can act as your very own data janitor. If correctly set up, it will make sure that old, irrelevant data doesn't stick around. And this ensures that the output that Copilot produces is always its most relevant and useful. The quality improvements this can produce can be profound, and something I definitely recommend checking out. Next, let's look at another crucial compliance ingredient: monitoring. Especially during the early adoption phase, it can be crucial to carefully examine Copilot usage. What are users asking of Copilot? Is it in line with what your organization wants? And what outputs does Copilot produce? What files does it access to do that? Monitoring all of this is crucial to a successful Copilot adoption. So let's start with the Copilot interactions. Like we said, a user and Copilot talk to each other via chats. And in the beginning, when you only have 10 test users, then it can be fine to manually review those chats to see that everything is going as expected. However, when you deploy Copilot to more and more users, and there are thousands or even millions of Copilot interactions each day, how do you continue monitoring these for potential issues? And the answer here is a Purview tool, called Communication Compliance, which I will just shorten to CC. A tool that was built to ensure interactions between employees remain compliant with policies and regulations. It enables automatically detecting things like harassment and threatening language and adult content and so forth. But as it turns out, communication compliance can also be used to monitor Copilot interactions. How is this useful for us? Well, remember the example we mentioned way earlier of a user asking, "What's my manager's salary?" We can use communication compliance to detect such risky or even harmful interactions like this early and take appropriate action. Note that this tool is only for monitoring. It doesn't block risky interactions, it only detects them. Human beings, communication compliance investigators, still have to look at the detected chats and decide how to proceed. Next up, the audit tool. The word audit usually conjures up images of a process that's roughly as pleasant as root canal work. Rest assured that this tool, in spite of its name, will not be asking for your financial records or statements of liability. Instead, Purview Audit is a tool that allows you to search and retain the audit log events from your tenant. It's not limited to events taking place in Purview either, but from every conceivable system. Everything taking place in your tenant gets logged and can be viewed with this tool. It's immediately apparent why this is useful in Copilot. As can be expected, all the interactions with Copilot, such as the timing, the circumstances, what files were accessed, etc., in Copilot are logged. And Purview Audit can be a useful tool to find and examine all of those log entries and to retain them for as long as is needed. This is the audit tool. Especially in the beginning, it's useful to check with the audit tool those log entries for anomalies. Even when Copilot is fully rolled out, it can also be a useful tool to reconstruct events after the fact, such as in a legal case. On the topic of legal cases, let's look at another tool called eDiscovery. I'll just shorten this with ED. If you've never heard about it, eDiscovery refers to identifying, collecting, and reviewing electronic information that is pertinent in a legal proceeding. This can happen, for example, because a judge has ordered you to produce everything relevant to a specific legal case. Purview eDiscovery exists to do exactly that, identifying and collecting information based on search queries. In addition, the identified data can then be put under what's called a legal hold, preventing any modification or deletion of the item in question. The digital equivalent of putting data in a sealed evidence envelope, if you will. Once all the evidence collecting and reviewing is complete, it can then be exported for viewing by third parties. Naturally, we can also use eDiscovery to find, review, and legally hold, and then later export, Copilot interactions, because, as we said, Copilot interactions are stored in the user's mailbox. And this, by the way, can be useful even outside of legal cases, as it allows gathering all Copilot interactions that fit specific criteria, which can be especially useful in the early pilot phase and, of course, beyond. All right, now that we've got monitoring out of the way, let's briefly discuss a tool called data loss prevention. And this is quite a deep topic in and of itself, but we'll keep it brief here as the basics are pretty straightforward. So data loss prevention, or sometimes also called data leakage prevention, usually shortened to DLP, simply refers to stopping data from being overshared. If we want to picture this, imagine Alice here. We'll give her some nice hair. And Alice wants to send or share something. Could be a file, could be an email, could be a chat message maybe, what have you. And over here on the right-hand side, we have whoever or whatever she would like to share this with. So could be a coworker. It could also be a website. Draw that a little bigger. Or it could be a cloud service somewhere. Whatever the case, Alice wants to share something. Now, instead of just letting Alice do as we please, we instead put in a system that first checks and inspects the data that's being sent or shared to determine, does this contain any sensitive information? If yes, then the sending, sharing, whatever, can be blocked. This is especially useful for organizations that deal in confidential or sensitive information and must ensure that it doesn't reach unauthorized third parties. Think banks or healthcare providers, and you get the idea. Okay. Purview, as you might have expected at this point, has such a tool, unsurprisingly, called Purview Data Loss Prevention. More features and integrations with Copilot may come in the near future, but at the moment of this recording, in the context of Copilot, this tool is used primarily to regulate the use of other generative AI. So basically these two here. If you will recall the first video, Copilot's data residency and data protection guarantees are quite strong. Data at rest stays in your tenant, and for data in transit, you have strong assurances that they stay within Microsoft's trust boundaries and are not stored elsewhere or used to train the LLM. However, what do you do if your employees, in addition to Copilot, use other publicly available generative AI, like ChatGPT, Bard, Watson, and so forth? These offer no protections regarding your company data. Usually the license terms of such publicly available generative AI explicitly allow the provider to use any interaction to further train their models. This means that if your users upload sensitive information to these third-party AI systems, this data could become incorporated into these AI providers' LLMs and hence become accessible to the whole world. Now, you could, of course, simply eliminate the usage of such public generative AI altogether by blocking all third-party tools on your proxy, for example. However, this is difficult to do consistently because more generative AI tools just keep popping up, and there may even be strong internal pushbacks because your employees like using those. Purview Data Loss Prevention allows a compromise. It can inspect uploading or even copy-pasted data in these publicly available third-party AI apps, and then block the upload or the copy-paste if it detects sensitive information. At the same time, your users are still free to use such third-party AI apps for benign purposes, such as, can you tell me a joke, or give me a recipe for a sponge cake. And so this topic, like I said, can go a lot deeper. Microsoft Purview DLP is a topic in and of itself. We'll leave it with this brief discussion. However, like I said, more info always in the description. And we move instead to the final tool of the discussion, but certainly not the least tool, and that is the AI Hub. This is a product which, at the time of this recording, is still in public preview. And unlike everything else that we discussed here, this is not an independent tool. It's more like, if we were to draw this, it's more like a central command hub. I mean, it's in the name, right? Hub. And it acts to be a one-stop shop for all your AI data security needs, especially as it relates to Copilot. It pulls in data from all the other tools that we just discussed. So be that from your sensitivity labels, or from the audit tool, or from the data management and oversharing tools, whatever have you, they all feed data into the AI Hub. And it provides, as such, multiple dashboards which you can use to monitor Copilot, and even providing intelligent recommendations with additional actions you can take to improve AI data security. It also provides ready-made, adjusted for your environment, policies that you can simply use and implement straight away. Also various configuration settings, etc. It contains essentially recommendations on how to improve your data security and compliance. So since it offers all of this from one central location, it is a great place to start from. Okay. And with that, I hope your head isn't spinning yet. There is, like I mentioned, a lot of more detail we could go into each of these discussed tools, but I believe it's important not to lose the forest for the trees and not to get stuck into the details, so we will leave it at this bird's eye view. Now, given everything that we've just discussed, if we zoom out here a little bit, you might be wondering, goodness me, where do I even start? So let me leave you with these 3 recommendations. First, check out the AI Hub. Yes, it's still in public preview. Yes, things might change. Yes, not everything might be working perfectly yet. But it already provides you with a great overview and even recommendations on what you can do to improve your AI data security and compliance. So start there. Second, you saw this coming, but use sensitivity labels. Not only are they great to have across your entire organization in general, but they get doubly useful when Copilot enters the picture. Setting up labels and publishing them to a few test users is relatively simple and straightforward and yields huge dividends in the future. And third, get started with data lifecycle management. Just like with sensitivity labels, this is great to have with or without Copilot. Even if setting up data lifecycle management can be considered a more mid to long-term project because it takes time to figure out how long should everything be retained, how long should it be, when should it be deleted, and so forth, it's useful to start early even if you have to start small. Now, while it may be a topic for future videos, giving an in-depth tutorial on how to use each and every one of these tools would unfortunately far exceed the scope of this series. So to make up for that, I've mentioned this several times, I've left links in the video's description on each and every one of them. Please go check them out if you need help. And one final piece of advice that I'd like to leave you with is, when you introduce Copilot, first deploy it to a small set of test users, and then use monitoring to monitor those interactions of those users with Copilot carefully. We looked at several tools: communication, compliance, e-discovery, and audit. These can all help you, especially in the early stages, to see is Copilot being used as you intended? Only deploy Copilot to more users once you're satisfied that it's not being misused or abused. All right, and with that, we've very definitively reached the end of this video series. My hope is that with this, you have a solid foundation for getting started with a safe and compliant Copilot adoption. At this point, you understand how Copilot works. You understand what Microsoft does on its side, which parts you are responsible for, how to prevent data oversharing, and how to use Purview. If after all of this you still have questions, don't worry, don't hesitate to reach out to Microsoft. We'll always be happy to help you. And please check out all the materials we have linked in the description, which include detailed information on everything we discussed in all of the videos. I'd like to thank you very much for staying until the end, and I wish you many pleasant and productive days with Copilot. Until next time, bye-bye and take care.